In the weeks before the invasion, the Luftwaffe began the intense bombing of Crete. The mission of Luftwaffe bombers was to soften the defenses and prevent the arrival of the supplies on the island. Only a fragment of needed supplies reached the Crete defenders. The Royal Air Force did everything to prevent the Luftwaffe air attacks. But with a limited force, they faced complete annihilation. A few days before the invasion, the last of the RAF aircraft were evacuated from the Crete. The British forces in the Mediterranean were stretched to their limit. Fighting in North Africa was the priority, and in addition, the RAF assigned most of its aircraft to protect the strategically important island of Malta. Without the opposition, Luftwaffe was free to rule the sky over the Crete. This fact will prove crucial during the battle. The Luftwaffe bombing campaign reached its peak on the morning of May 20, 1941, 1 hour before the invasion. At the same time, hundreds of transport planes began to take off from various airports throughout Greece, carrying thousands of paratroopers to their mission. The takeoff did not go without problems. The commanding officer of the 7th Airborne Division, General Wilhelm Sussman, became one of the first casualties of the battle, when his glider crashes, shortly after the takeoff. At 8 a.m., the first paratroopers jumped from their planes. The airborne assault on Crete began. In the previous years, during the campaigns in Western Europe, the German tactic was to drop the paratroopers directly on their target. They tried to do the same during the attack on Crete. This tactic will prove to be completely wrong. As they left the plane, the German paratroopers were armed only with a pistol and a knife, while their primary weapons, rifles and machine guns, were thrown in separate containers. To be effective, they had to reach a container with the weapon and ammunition. It was a very difficult task, when you land in the middle of a heavily defended enemy position. What the Operation Mercury planners expected is not completely clear. The fact is that with this tactic, they sent thousands of paratroopers to certain death. Many were killed while still in the air, or during the search for weapon containers. Others died while stuck in olive trees. They were killed not just by the Commonwealth or Greek troops but also by the Cretan civilians. In the area near Maleme, the first gliders of the 1st Battalion, of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment, began to land at 8 a.m., west of the Maleme airfield. The gliders landed at the riverbed of Tavronitis River, relatively successfully. However, this was not the case with the paratroopers. The 21st, 22nd, and 23rd Infantry Battalion, of the 5th Infantry Brigade, of the New Zealand Division, defended Maleme and the surrounding area. The 3rd Battalion of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment was dropped right on them. The casualties were enormous. The 3rd Battalion lost 2/3 of the men during the initial drop. Small groups of the surviving paratroopers of the 3rd Battalion were scattered around the airfield. The 4th and 2nd Battalion landed more to the west of the airfield, relatively unharmed. General Eugen Meindl, commander of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment, quickly organized his troops in the area, and began to put pressure on the New Zealand defenders. Paratroopers of the 1st Battalion managed to seize the bridge over the Tavronitis River and secure the bridgehead on the western outskirts of the airfield. Meindl sends 2 detachments to take Hill 107, the dominant point of the Maleme defense. Soon, both parties made contact with Companies A and B, of the 22nd Battalion defending the hill. Although the German advance was halted, the paratroopers put constant pressure on the defenders. During the morning, the battle intensifies as the Germans increase their efforts to take the airport and Hill 107. All companies of the 22nd Battalion were now involved in the fight. The situation on the field worried Colonel Leslie Andrew, commanding officer of the 22nd Battalion, who was no longer sure if his stretched troops could withstand the pressure and stop the Germans. In parallel with an attack on Maleme, an attack on the area near Hania began. The first gliders of the 3rd Regiment of the 7th Airborne Division landed on the Akrotiri Peninsula, northern of Hania. The troops landed widely scattered to be effective. Although they managed to carry out minor attacks, most of them were eventually killed or captured by the companies of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. The main body of the 3rd Regiment landed again on top of the Commonwealth and Greek positions, suffering many casualties. The 3rd Regiment regrouped in the area south of Hania in the shallow valley, known as the Prison Valley. Oberst Richard Heydrich, commanding officer of the 3rd Regiment, the 7th Airborne Division, immediately sent his troops into the offensive action towards the village of Galatos, and slight elevation known as the Pink Hill. Throughout the day, both sides carried out a series of attacks and counterattacks without much success. By the afternoon, General Student did not get a clear picture of what was going on at the Crete. In those circumstances, General Student decided to carry on with the second wave according to plan. The 1st Regiment and 2nd Regiment of the 7th Airborne Division boarded the same transport planes used during the initial drop in the morning. Due to the problems with damaged planes and refueling, second wave arrived over their target with significant delay. The parachute drop in the area around Rethymno airfield began at 4:15 p.m., 2 hours behind schedule. Due to the delays in takeoff, the formation of transport planes fell apart during the way. As a result, the paratroopers were widely scattered. 2 battalions of the 2nd Regiment, the 7th Airborne Division, had a rough reception, as they landed on top of the 19th Australian Brigade's defensive positions. Oberst Alfred Sturm, commander of the 2nd Regiment, became a prisoner of war, being captured during the descent. The survivors formed 2 groups, one on the west and one on the eastern side of the airfield. Both groups began with offensive actions as soon as they formed up. 2 companies of the 3rd Battalion, under the command of Hauptmann Wiedemann, headed west towards Rethymno. They were stopped by a mixed force of Greek troops, Cretan police and civilians. The western group under Major Crow began a strong attack on Hill A, the dominant point on the eastern side of the Rethymno airport. They managed to occupy most of Hill A, but are eventually stopped by the Australian defence. Lieutenant Colonel Ian Campbell, commander of the forces defending Rethymno airfield, requested reinforcements from General Freiberg for the counterattack. Freiberg told him that none were available. Campbell decided to counterattack with all the troops he had, the next morning. The first paratroopers arrived at Heraklion at 5:30 p.m. The defence of the Heraklion and nearby airfield was the task of the British 14th Infantry Brigade, under the command of Brigadier Brian Chappell. Due to a failure of wireless communications on the island, the 14th Brigade became aware of the airborne assault in western Crete late in the afternoon, few hours before the German attack. Again, as in previous drops, many paratroopers landed on top of the British defensive positions. The 2nd Battalion of 1st Regiment, the 7th Airborne Division, suffered heavy casualties as they landed close to the airport. Many died while still in the air, others were killed as they searched for weapons containers. The survivors find the cover in the abandoned buildings west of the airfield. The 3rd Battalion landed west of the Heraklion relatively unharmed. As they formed up, they began the assault on the town, reaching the city gates, and forcing the Greek garrison and number of armed civilians to retreat. By the evening, the 3rd Battalion managed to gain a foothold in the Heraklion, fighting a house-to-house battle in the narrow streets. The regimental headquarters group, and the 1st Battalion, under Oberst Bruno Brauer, the commanding officer of the 1st Regiment, the 7th Airborne Division, landed far to the east. They quickly moved to the west, where they joined the remnants of the 2nd Battalion, where they form a defensive position on the ridge, east of the airfield. The 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment reinforced the 1st Regiment. The paratroopers landed without any problems far west of the Heraklion. During the night, Battalion moved east to join the 3rd Battalion. Meanwhile, the battle around Maleme raged on. New Zealand's troops were under constant Luftwaffe bombardment. Colonel Andrew has been wounded during the air attack. Moreover, with the arrival of the troops from the 4th and 2nd Battalions of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment, the thin defensive line held by the 22nd New Zealand Battalion was on the verge of breaking. At 5 p.m., Andrew requested the brigade headquarters to send the 23rd Battalion to reinforce the 22nd. Brigadier James Hargest, the commanding officer of the 5th New Zealand Brigade, rejected his request. The invasion of Crete was the first massive airborne assault in the war. The German paratroopers were scattered all around the drop area. It was an unusual battle, without a clear front line, and neither side could count on the artillery support. The German paratroopers have shown extraordinary fighting spirit, as they have undertaken offensive actions against a much more numerous enemy. Even the smallest groups of paratroopers did everything they could to inflict damage to the defenders. These circumstances raised confusion in the Commonwealth ranks. Moreover, the wireless communications on the Crete were prone to malfunction, prevent the commanders of Commonwealth and Greek troops to gain a clear picture of the situation. All the troops were engaged in the combat, and because of the highly aggressive approach of the German paratroopers, the impression was that the invasion force was much bigger than it actually was. For that reason, the 22nd New Zealand Battalion was left on its own to fight the main body of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment, while 21st and 23rd Battalions fight remnants of the German 3rd Battalion. Andrew tried to organize a local counterattack with the C Company and the support of 2 light tanks. Very soon, the tanks suffered mechanical failure, and the advance was brought to a halt. As the day came to its end, the German position did not look very bright. They failed to reach any objective set for the first day. Casualties were high, especially among junior officers. Among the wounded was General Meindl, severely wounded earlier that day. Hauptmann Walter Gierica took command of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment as the most senior surviving officer. The German attack at all sectors stalled as they prepared for the last stand. In the meantime, an event that will change the course of the battle began to unfold. As the night felt, after a day of constant fighting, without any reinforcements, Colonel Leslie Andrew decides to withdraw his battalion from Hill 107 and Maleme airfield. At first, the Germans were unaware of this action, as they were concentrated on preparing the defense. Only because of the initiative of an unexpected source, the Germans gained control over the airfield. Dr. Heinrich Neumann, the medical officer of the Luftwaffe Sturmregiment, gathered all the men available at his medical post, and formed a combat group. He took his combat group and headed towards Hill 107. On the way, the groups of scattered paratroopers joined him. Eventually, they find out that Hill 107 was unoccupied. This unexpected gift allowed the Germans to gain control over Hill 107 and Maleme airfield. Finally, they had a firm foothold on the island. The gates of the Crete were now open.